and family. So thank you all. So how am I feeling? First of all, how are we? We're okay. We live in Jerusalem, which, Israel is such a small place, and yet the geographical distinctions become very important during war. When it was the Intifada, Jerusalem was the front line, much more so than Tel Aviv. In this war, it's Tel Aviv. When we have a war with Hezbollah, it's the north that experiences it most intensely. And so the front within the home front keeps shifting depending on the war. And this time around, we are experiencing this a little more easily than Tel Aviv. We're not in shelters, and in Tel Aviv they are. On the other hand, I live literally 5 minutes away from Sheikh Jarrah, where the Arab families are being threatened with a court eviction. And I can't go there now. It's too unsafe. I just saw a report now that there was a car ramming and 4 police were injured a few blocks away from where I'm sitting. So this feeling of immunity is relative. I feel reasonably safe in the missile aspect of this war, but in the other aspect of the war, which is the more intimate neighbor versus neighbor war, I feel especially vulnerable. How I'm feeling now is I feel like I'm being torn apart from so many directions. We've been through a lot, my wife Sarah and I, in the 40 years. We moved here in 1982. It's almost 40 years that we've lived here. We moved at the beginning of the first Lebanon war. We moved into war, so we knew what we were signing up for. We raised 3 kids during the second Intifada, which was in some ways the most devastating time in Israel's history, when suicide bombings were going off seemingly every day. And you felt that your public space was being taken from you, and you didn't trust the solidity of reality. That was the experience of the second Intifada. And Diane and Harold, you may remember, we met during the second Intifada. You were one of the few American Jews who actually showed up here while the suicide bombings were happening. And it was an extraordinary experience of not knowing whether you could trust reality. It was a feeling of everything falling apart. I haven't had that experience since then as much as I have now. And maybe in some ways, it's even worse now. Because what's happening now is that we're getting hit from multiple directions. First of all, our weakest enemy, which is Hamas. When you think of Hezbollah in Lebanon, think of Iran sitting in Syria, and Hamas in the south, Hamas is by far the weakest of our enemies. And yet what we've experienced this last week is the most devastating and sustained rocket attack on the Tel Aviv area that we've ever experienced in our history. Saddam Hussein's 39 Scuds were a joke, and it sent the whole country into what we called then the sealed rooms. We all ran into our shelters because of 39 Scuds. Hamas has succeeded in hitting Tel Aviv in 1 hour in a way that we're reeling from that. There's the sense of it's already decided that Israel is guilty even before the war began. And that's a result of Sheikh Jarrah and the incidents on the Temple Mount. We went into this war guilty. And so the world is judging us now as war criminals, no matter what happens. And I've never experienced the intensity of that in a way that I have in this conflict. But the worst of it for me personally is what's been happening on our streets. The violence between Arab Israelis and Jewish Israelis. Now, you know this, Amy, and Harold and Diane, you know this as well, that one of my principal civic commitments as an Israeli has been trying to bring the Arab community into the mainstream. I've devoted a good part of my life to that. And what I've experienced in these last few days is complete disintegration. The hatred, the violence, the fear that now characterizes relations between Arab citizens and Jewish citizens. We're not talking about the West Bank and Gaza now. This is Israel. This is Haifa, our showcase for coexistence. And so this is a moment where, honestly, I'm in deep mourning. I am terrified for what's coming next. I don't know how we pick up the pieces. We will, because we have no choice, and we always do. But right now, at this moment, I'm still in the phase of mourning. I'm not yet in the phase post-Shiva. I'm in the Shiva phase right now for coexistence. There will be the aftermath, and we'll figure out, okay, what do we do now? And, Israel has a very strong network of coexistence organizations. It's all over the country. And these groups are already kicking in, and we will push back. But right now, if you're asking how I'm feeling that something has died. That's how I'm feeling.
So, you talk about what's happening in Israel itself. How do you explain the violence and the hostility in light of, I remember hearing you on a podcast during COVID, and it felt like there was really Arab-Israeli relations, Arab-Jewish relations were really on the uptick, and things were going quite well, actually. So what do you think happened?
So the irony here, the terrible irony, is that we have just had the best year in Arab-Jewish relations in the history of the state. I wrote a piece for The Atlantic a few months ago called Israel's Arab Moment, which celebrated the emergence of coexistence as a mainstream phenomenon as a result of Corona. 25% of Israeli doctors and 30% of our nurses are Arab. And we experienced Corona as one society, more than any other crisis we've ever been in. And then the political deadlock that we've been under contributed to this feeling of we can really create a different relationship, because for the first time, we were looking at a government coalition that would replace Netanyahu, that would be supported by the Arab parties. Mm-hmm. It was a fantastic vision of normalizing Arabs in the political system. And that was just a week ago. A week ago, I really felt, and I think many of us here felt, we are on the verge of a new era. And we were right. We were on the verge of a new era, but it wasn't that. It's something very, very different. If you're asking me, Amy, what caused this? I think there are a few things. First of all, for the last few years, the Arab community has been pleading with the government, demanding that the government deal with spiraling violent crime in the Arab sector. Arab crime is intensifying. And unlike the situation that you have in America, where Black communities are saying, defund the police, the Arab communities were saying, send us more police. And this was a very precious moment, because the Arab community was turning to the state and saying, you are supposed to be protecting us. We're not outside the the range of Israeliness, you have a responsibility to us as Israeli citizens. Treat us as Israeli citizens. And what's happened now is that the crime on the Arab street has spilled over into the Jewish street, as inevitably it must. You don't contain crime in one sector, especially not in such a small and intimate space like the state of Israel. The second thing that's happened is that Netanyahu normalized Kahanism by accepting the Kahanist party as part of his coalition. This is the first time that we've ever had that in the history of this country. Netanyahu did that. And so, big surprise that Itamar Ben-Gvir, who was the head of the Kahanist party, Jewish Power, was running from one town to another like a reverse fireman, setting fires and inciting the Jews against the Arabs. We shouldn't lose sight of the fact that the violence began in the Arab sector. It did not begin in the Jewish sector, but once it began, Jews joined in. And so there is so much cumulative rage in this country, so much frustration. And let me tell you a story. I was with a group of American Jews. This goes back a few years. And there was an air raid siren in Jerusalem. There were missiles that were fired toward Jerusalem that landed in outside of Jerusalem. And we were a group of Israelis and a group of American Jews. And the Israelis heard the siren and said, okay, we'll go to the shelter, but we weren't in any particular rush. And the American Jews panicked and were really in a state of close to hysteria. And it was at that moment that I realized what the price we pay for living here is. And we don't even realize it anymore. But when you go from rockets to missiles to suicide bombings to war, it's going to it will put you in a kind of a permanent PTSD situation. And so I think that both peoples are in permanent PTSD. And so it doesn't take a lot to set us off. And, one of the things that outsiders miss about Israelis is they say, well, you've got all the power, and they apply this frankly ridiculous American language of power and the whole woke terminology, which Israelis don't understand at all. And when you apply that to our situation here, it just sounds like a cartoon. And Israelis, we're not victims. We don't feel like we're victims, but we certainly feel vulnerable. And we certainly feel that we're under attack. And yes, I have the power and I'm going to use the power to protect myself and not feel guilty about it. But the cumulative impact of going from one war to the other, from one terror attack to the other, is something of what we've seen on the Jewish side this week. On the Arab side, it's the cumulative impact of discrimination, of the occupation of their families. They are citizens of a country that's occupying their families in the West Bank and Gaza. It's an impossible situation for both sides. And so that's what we're seeing playing out.
So do you think that these attacks are coordinated? And do you think that the attacks are coordinated either from the Jewish or the Arab groups? And somebody asked if you could talk a little bit about the what crime has spilled over.
I don't think the attacks were coordinated, although the Jewish responses were incited by the Kahanists going from city to city. And so in that sense, there was some organization. In terms of the crime spilling over, you have an enormous amount of weaponry that's been stockpiled in the Arab community. Some of this has now, I think, is coming out. I don't think anywhere near what's there has come out this week, which is terrifying to think, because what we've experienced this week has been a major assault. But nevertheless, I think that that's partly what's happened. Was there another part to that question?
No, I think we're good. I think you got that. So, you know, one of the things that I hear actually is regularly is people say things like, well, Israel started this round. And of course, if you could help us, how do we respond to that? Israel started it because they didn't let people gather at the Damascus gate. Like, help us understand where the starting point is.
Hamas is sending missiles or rockets at Israel because they have an opportunity. Hamas is trying to upstage the Palestinian Authority, which has just canceled elections. Abbas is in his 15th year of a 4-year term. What's happening is internal Palestinian politics. Hamas is the protector of Jerusalem. It's all a game. It's a show. And so this is one line of argument that drives Israelis absolutely mad.
That's why
Hamas does not need a moral justification, only a pretext. The essence of Hamas is to destroy Israel, to kill Israelis. That's the business of Hamas. And we stupidly gave them the pretext, not the moral justification, but the pretext. Okay. It was Ramadan, and we should have been extra careful about what we do on the Temple Mount. Now, I don't know how much this was reported, but the police went up to the Temple Mount because Palestinian young people were throwing rocks at Jews down below at the wall. Now, the police had to go up and they had to stop it. What they did not have to do was throw smoke grenades into Al-Aqsa, especially on Ramadan. You don't do that. And so did we help incite this? Absolutely. Is this what explains why Hamas is sending 2,000 rockets into Tel Aviv and other Israeli towns? Really?
Okay. Yossi, did you happen to see Bernie Sanders' New York Times op-ed, Palestine?
Oh, I did. I
thought you might have. Do you want to tell us your reaction to it?
I did. And I can say that Bernie Sanders ending that piece, I'll say two things about his piece. First of all, and I knew this was coming. As I'm reading, I said, now what he's going to do is say, of course, sending rockets into civilian areas is wrong and Israel has the right to defend itself. But that phrase, Israel has the right to defend itself, but means nothing, because all he's doing there is signaling that, yeah, I understand. I know you claim this is self-defense, but look, but here's where my passion really is. I don't care about the fact that half of Israel is spending a week in air raid shelters. I couldn't care less, because I'm writing to you about the Palestinians. That's what I care about. And the second thing that I want to say about that op-ed is how he chose to end it, by writing Palestinian Lives Matter and repeating it twice, just in case his woke readers didn't get it the first time. Palestinian Lives Matter, Palestinian Lives Matter. What he's signaling to them is it is now fair game to apply all of the language that we're using in our war against racism in America to Israel. Now we're going to adopt the Black Lives Matter paradigm to the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. What he has really done is the ideological equivalent of, in Hebrew, we have an expression, lahatir et damo, to make the other's blood permissible to spill. That is what Bernie Sanders has signaled to the whole woke community. That's what Bernie Sanders, that's his gift to the Jewish people. When he speaks out as a Jew, and we all know he's writing there as a Jew, he's writing from that place of Israel, you're on your own. That's Bernie Sanders. Was I clear enough about how I feel about that op-ed?
No, I think
do I need to make myself a little clearer?
So as we stick to that comment, I'm just curious what influence, or if you want to comment on any, if you think the American administration could have in terms of a resolution of the war. And I've heard it said that Biden has emboldened Hamas, and if only Trump were president, none of this would have happened. And I'm just curious how you would respond to those issues.
I think that if you were to ask Israelis, do you think that Hamas would be doing this if Trump were president? I think most Israelis would say no. Hamas wouldn't dare. I don't know whether that's true or not. I don't know. I don't know if Hamas has that calculation. I don't think the U.S. wouldn't attack Gaza. I do think that Iran is more emboldened because the Democrats are back in office. That I have no doubt about. We can talk about that. So no, I personally don't think that this is related to Biden. And I think Biden so far has been pretty good on Gaza. I hope it holds. From precedent, we know that it holds until there's an incident or some terrible tragedy, some iconic moment of Palestinian suffering that makes it impossible for Israel to continue. I don't think we're there yet. God forbid. I hope we don't. Obviously, hope we don't hit that moment. But I think that if we do, that's the moment when Biden will tell us enough, and we're probably close to a ceasefire anyway. That's my sense.
So, what do you think will happen after a ceasefire? And especially, I'm thinking about in Bat Yam or in these places of coexistence that have been decimated. I'm thinking about Akko.
One of the hardest things about this is that the violence happened in mixed cities.
Yeah.
It happened where Jews and Arabs live as neighbors. And that's almost the most unbearable part of this. It didn't happen in Arab villages, and it didn't happen in Jewish neighborhoods because Jews and Arabs aren't living together. So what does this mean? Look, the mixed towns have a foundation of coexistence to build on. There are networks, there are relationships. So that's the good news. The fact that it happened in the mixed towns is both devastating and also hopeful, because the mixed towns do some more than others. Lod is much more fragile. Akko is a bit better. Haifa is very good. Ramle is better than neighboring Lod, but not great. So each of these mixed towns has a different dynamic. But the fact that years have been invested in creating relationships means that those relationships were being, in some sense, nurtured for precisely a moment like this. The other thing that I'd like to say in terms of the morning after, and this is very important for us to keep in mind on the positive side of the ledger. And God knows the positive side is pretty thin at the moment. Nevertheless, the Abraham Accords are holding. And the Abraham Accords are significant because they are the first peace agreements that Israel has signed that are genuine expressions of mutual longing for normalization. We didn't have it with Egypt. We certainly didn't have it with Jordan. We have it with the UAE. We potentially have it with Morocco and certainly Bahrain. Sudan, I'm not sure of. But we really have already the beginnings of people-to-people relationships, of economic relationships being created, to say nothing of an extraordinary web of security relationships that we have with the UAE and with the Saudis, by the way. And so the fact that we've gone through not just a war with Gaza is a side issue for Arab countries. The leadership in Arab countries hates Hamas. They're angry at us for not destroying Hamas, not for going to war with Hamas. The piece of this that's so hard for Arab countries was the Temple Mount and Sheikh Jarrah. Mm-hmm. Those are the pieces that have placed the strain on our relationship with Arab countries. And so that's where we stand now. And it's the fact that the relationships are holding despite what's happened in the Temple Mount during Ramadan, during Layl al-Qaeda. It was an extraordinary testament to the durability, the seriousness of the commitment of our partners in the Abraham Accords.
So, one of the things, do you imagine that the Abraham Accords had a negative impact by sidelining the Palestinian conflict? Do you think that in some way that minimized that issue and that led to this violence?
I think there's an interesting argument to be made that Hamas wanted to get the world's attention again because the Palestinians have clearly lost the world's interest. It's back. It's certainly back. I don't know how long it'll hold. I guess it'll hold until the next crisis somewhere in the world diverts their attention. Although I fear that woke America has been mobilized now, and that this is going to become a central passion for large numbers of progressives. And that will be a problem for Israel, but it's going to be a much bigger problem for American Jews. And I wish that Israeli leaders paid more attention to the impact of what happens here on the American Jewish community, on the diaspora generally, because you are our collateral damage, and we don't always own up to it. This is a collateral damage moment, I feel, big time. And I really worry much more about you than I worry about us. And I felt that way about BDS. BDS isn't a strategic threat to Israel. BDS is a strategic threat to the American Jewish community. And it's a strategic threat to you because what it does is force American Jews into a place of insecurity. Now, my generation, I grew up in the 1960s and 70s in America. My generation was the transitional generation that for American Jews feeling themselves completely at home in America, unconditionally. You don't have to look over your shoulder. You don't have to lower your voice in public if you're speaking about a Jewish issue. That's when I was a child, I still remember that that was the case. By the time I got to college, it was no longer the case. Mm-hmm. And that happened in the 70s. And the great achievement of American Jewry in the last two generations was that you were accepted by non-Jewish America unconditionally. What BDS is trying to do is create a condition for Jewish acceptance, a loyalty test. You're going to have to prove that you're not the wrong kind of Jew. Now, 2 or 3 generations ago, being the wrong kind of Jew was speaking too loudly, waving your hands, having a bit of a Yiddish inflection in your voice. The wrong kind of Jew you can see in The Great Gatsby, in The Sun Also Rises, the loud Jew who doesn't quite know how to fit in polite Gentile company. That was the wrong kind of Jew. Today, the wrong kind of Jew for woke America are Zionists. And what they are demanding is you have to prove that you deserve to be part of their America by repudiating any connection with Israel. That situation exists in labor England, or it existed under Corbyn, where Jewish students on campus were always on trial. And if you're a Zionist, you're a criminal. That's where I fear things are heading. And I'm desperately worried for you right now, more than for me.
So I want to say I'm worried. And I hear you. I also want to just share with you a little something that happened last night in my house, just because as you worry, I want to give you a little bit of hope. My son had over 7 or 8 young men who he graduated from high school with, and they all grew up in the congregation. And they started to ask me a few questions about what was going on, trying to understand it a little bit better. And one of the young men said, "I can see we really have to pay attention. And we really have to know what's going on, and we can't just listen to NPR." And I thought to myself, if you could really hold on to that and say that and really educate yourself, these 8 kids, because they were really like, they didn't know, and they kind of understood they couldn't just trust the Times, and that they had to do their own research. I'm mindful that that's a small sample, 8 kids who grew up in my shul and are my son's friends. But it made me think, if we could get that message out to all of our children of how do we help them learn that they have to take responsibility.
I mean, look, honestly, Amy, the reason that I wrote my last book, Letters to My Palestinian Neighbor, it was not just a letter to my Palestinian neighbor, it was a letter to young American Jews who would not have read a book called Letters to a Young American Jew. Now, I did fully intend to write that book to my Palestinian neighbor, but I was hoping that young American Jews would be eavesdropping on my conversation with my Palestinian neighbor. And what I've seen is, and the book has gotten around, and I got this, I get extraordinary responses. I got an email from a reader, a Jewish college kid. She wrote that having read Letters gave her this kind of way of coping with this moment. And that's what I was hoping to do. And we have not lost this battle by any means, but it is going to be a really tough battle.
100%.
And it's about to get tougher.
And you're right, we're on the front line. And this particular battle,
we're on the front line.
All of us are on the front line here.
And we in Israel are not helping you. We're not helping you.
No.
So
what do you think?
I did what I could. I tried to help.
Well, the book and your columns are often a huge help, actually, because they explain issues in nuanced ways. I wonder if you could go back and talk a little bit about whether or not you think the situation now is informed by the talks in Vienna around the Iran deal, if you think that has any connection to the start.
It's hard to know how much Iran is involved, how much mischief Iran is engaged in behind the scenes. I would guess that Iran's fingers is in the mix. Again, how much? Unlike Hezbollah, which is under the direct authority of the Iranian Revolutionary Guards, Hamas is not. Islamic Jihad, which is the junior partner in this war in Gaza, is under the direct command of Iran, and Islamic Jihad did begin the initial wave of rockets, but certainly Iran is a prime beneficiary. Israel is in no condition right now to confront Iran. Even, we've been waging a not so secret war against the Iranian presence in Syria, and that's certainly taken a backseat to this war. And I think we need to remember that the war in Gaza is a sideshow. It is not the real threat that we're facing. Hamas has an arsenal that is probably 1/10 of the missiles and rockets that Hezbollah has. And Hezbollah's arsenal is far more precise and sophisticated. And what we're seeing now is that the Iron Dome is able to deal with, let's say, 90% of what's coming from Hamas. What do we do if we're dealing with Hezbollah, Iran, Syria simultaneously, and we're getting literally thousands of rockets a day? That's what we're going to face if we're in a war with the northern border. And so this is really a moment where I think our strategic planners are losing sleep, not only trying to figure out how do we knock out Hamas's capability from hitting Tel Aviv tonight, but what does this mean for Israel down the road? It's a very terrifying moment.
So someone put in the question, do most Israelis understand how profoundly destructive Netanyahu's embrace of Trump had been to American-Israeli relations by choosing sides in an intensely partisan American political virtual civil war? He has made Israel, for the first time in our shared history, a partisan issue in the US. And then this person said the Sanders op-ed is just the tip of the iceberg. How do you respond to that?
I agree. Netanyahu thinks of himself as a brilliant strategist. He is not a strategist. He is a brilliant tactician. Netanyahu has no strategy. You see it politically. His tactics are to survive politically from day to day. And you see it in the way he's fighting this war. What's the end game? Where are we heading? Netanyahu embraced Trump because tactically that made sense at the moment. America is giving us carte blanche. It was a dream, and it was a dream, and the dream's over, and now it's payback time. And I think the Israeli public has begun to internalize the damage that was done. Israelis have a very kind of vague understanding of bipartisanship. They kind of understand that the American-Israeli relationship is based on bipartisanship. But don't forget that the Trump years were preceded by 4 very traumatic Obama years. And just as Israelis didn't fully internalize the damage that Netanyahu was doing to the relationship, I think that many American Jews didn't fully internalize the damage that Obama did to the relationship. American Jews were focused on the aid that Obama gave to Israel, which was certainly substantial, on the Iron Dome, which was very important, but missed the ways in which Obama undermined the relationship, undermined the trust. And so Netanyahu, acting in the way he did toward Obama, was regarded by most Israelis, including by myself, I have to be frank with all of you, as self-protection. We felt that the single greatest strategic threat to Israel, maybe since 1967, is the Iran deal. Nothing has frightened me more than that since May 1967. And that has Obama's signature to it. And the way in which Obama went about the deal, deceiving Israel, not letting us know what was really being negotiated. And so in going to Congress and humiliating Obama at his home turf. But Israelis felt, without realizing the consequences of what that would mean down the road, Israelis felt that it was just payback. So this relationship, when you talk about Trump and Netanyahu, you need to factor in the third partner in this relationship, and that was Obama.
Thank you. So I want to reel it back a little bit to this conversation about the work we have here in the United States and the challenges we have. And in that regard, I want to ask you to explain a little bit more about what's happening right around the corner from you with Sheikh Jarrah, because it's hard. It's hard to actually explain this in a way. Again, I'm thinking about those 8 kids in my basement last night and how to help them really say, well, what's that really about? Because depending upon where they read, they get a very different story. And I wonder how you would tell that story.
Amy?
Yeah.
There's a legal issue and a moral issue and a political issue. The legal issue is complicated. An Israeli court ruled in the only way that it could, which is that this property belonged by right to Jews before 1948. An Israeli court could not rely on Jordanian law, which had confiscated that property. That's not legally tenable. And so legally, and again, I'm emphasizing legally, the Israeli court had to rule the way it did, but it even acted in some sense, in Hebrew, we say lifnim mishurat hadin, according to the spirit rather than the letter of the law. It acted to the limits of its capacity for reasonableness by offering the Arab residents a way out. It told the Palestinian families that if you agree to pay minimal rent, you will and your children will be able to remain in these homes in perpetuity. A minority of the families involved accepted the arrangement. They are not facing eviction. These 6 families rejected the arrangement. They are facing eviction. That's the legal side. The moral side is you can't have a situation where we allow Jews to reclaim properties from 1948 and Palestinians can't reclaim properties from 1948. Now, I don't want Palestinians to start reclaiming their lost homes in West Jerusalem. That's gone. That's gone. That was 70 years ago. There was a war. It's over. Whether there'll be compensation at the end, if we ever reach a peace agreement, I hope there will be compensation, not only for the Palestinians, also for Jews from Arab countries. There's a lot of compensation that will need to go around. But certainly at this phase of the conflict, you do not allow Jews to reclaim properties lost in 48 and not allow Palestinians. You put a complete freeze on all claims related to 1948. That, to my mind, is a moral position. Finally, there's a political issue here. And the political issue is that this crisis was caused by a far-right group that took the issue to court. And does the state of Israel allow a far-right group of settlers to determine its political agenda, to hijack its agenda? That's, for me, ultimately, that's what this is about as well. So if you're asking for a 2-minute soundbite on Sheikh Jarrah talking points, there are none. And I go crazy when I see, pro-Israel groups sending out talking points on Sheikh Jarrah. This is so much more complicated. And I personally am not willing to defend Sheikh Jarrah.
So that's actually very helpful. And I want to say, in a certain way, you gave an outline to say there's the legal, the political, and the moral. And a lot of times when we see things written about it, those three are intertwined and become like one. And I want to thank you for unpacking it and helping us digest it a little bit more. This is my last question, although I could talk to you from now until Erev Chag. My last question is, what are you going to do? What are your plans when the ceasefire has been? Because I imagine there will be a ceasefire soon. And what's there for you?
It's a really good question, Amy. And again, I'm still in the Shiva phase. I'm not in the reconstructing phase yet. Mm-hmm. I also have a personal issue, which is that I am deeply immersed in writing a book. And Corona has been great for me as a writer. I have really thrived under lockdown, and I'm reluctant to let the lockdown stop. I want to impose lockdown on myself to just keep writing. And so I've really been contracting my public activities. Zoom has been great. I don't have to travel from city to city on a lecture tour. I've been able to do it in my yoga pants in my room. It's just been a gift to me as a lecturer and as a writer, just to be able to just not leave my room. So, but this is an emergency, and I don't know what I'm going to do, but I know I'm going to have to do something. And I know that there are a lot of people right now in the state of Israel who are saying, what are we going to do now, without knowing what they're going to do, but knowing that we're going to have to do something.
So my prayer is that I know you'll find the right thing to do. And my prayer is just that your voice is amplified and that your teaching and your Torah is heard by many, because I continue to say your analysis of the situation is, it's really helpful for all of us. I want to conclude our session this morning actually by offering a prayer for the state of Israel. I'm mindful that a gathering like this isn't just an informational session. It's really an opportunity for our communities to come together and say, we're not where you are. We're on the sidelines, but our hearts are very much in Israel, and we're concerned and we're worried, and we stand with you. And saying the prayer for the state of Israel is really a small way of our standing with you and praying for peace and wholeness for all the inhabitants of the land. Avinu shebashamayim sur Yisrael v'goalo barech et medinat Yisrael reshit smichat geulatenu. Hagen aleh be'avrat chastecha ufros aleha sukat shlomecha ushloch orcha v'yamivcha v'roshecha tzareha v'yotzeha v'takneh b'etzah tova milfanecha chazeki yidei mignei eretz kodshenu v'anchilem Eloheinu Yeshua v'ateret nitzachon tatrem v'natata shalom ba'aretz v'simchat olam liyoshvecha v'nomar amen. Avinu Shebashamayim, stronghold and redeemer of the people Israel, bless the state of Israel, that it may be the beginning of our redemption. Dear God, shield it with your love, spread over it the shelter of your peace. Guide its leaders and advisors with your light and Torah, and help them with your good counsel. Strengthen the hands of those who defend our holy land. Deliver them, crown their efforts with triumph. Bless the land with peace and its inhabitants with lasting joy. And to that, I know we can all say amen.
Amen.
Thank you all very much for joining us
Thank
this
you, Amy.
morning, and Yossi to you this afternoon. And I just want to say Chag Sameach. My prayer is that it is a quiet Chag in the land of Israel.
Chag Sameach, everyone. Keep well, and love to you both, Diane and Harold. See you soon. Take care. Thank you, Amy.
Thank you. We'll be in touch.
Thank you, Amy, for arranging this.
Oh, no, this was really important for our community.
Absolutely.
And we'll do more, I promise.
Thanks, Amy. Great morning.
Thank you.
Very helpful.
Thank you. That was remarkable. Thank you.
Yeah, I recorded it and I will be happy to share the recording.
Thank
Excellent.
you, Amy. Sydney Perry here. Thank you so much.
Oh, of course. I'm glad you were here with us.
Last time I was there, I was with you and him. So
I know. I was trying to remember when that was.
yeah, yes, it's almost a lifetime away, babe. Yeah.
Indeed.
Anyway, it was wonderful, wonderful.
Good talk. Thank you all.
Take care.
Amy.